Good evening, everybody, and it's my great joy to be here in Nigeria. I've spoken in 48 different countries around the world about risk management. This is my first time in Nigeria. I'm very sorry about that. But I'm glad to have rectified my shortcoming before. I've been invited to speak on the subject of managing risk in nation building. I believe that risk management is a life skill. It's not a technical discipline. It's not only for corporations or for bankers or for insurance people. It's for all of us to understand and manage our significant risks in everything we do in life. And one of the books I plan to write in the future is will be called Managing Risk in Parenting. Because I have two daughters who have grown up and left home, and we have had some very risky experiences with our daughters, as you might imagine, especially if you have daughters. So I believe that risk management applies in the world of finance, in the world of business, in our personal worlds, in the world of entertainment and the arts, in the world of education, in the world of politics. And as we'll see in the next little while, I hope, it also belongs in that important realm of nation building. Let me start with a few words about the future. I think we'll all agree that the future has a number of things in it that would make us worried. So I'd like to just use this word danger to think about what some of those things might be. The future is not static. It doesn't just follow on and it will be exactly the same. There is volatility in the future. It's a dynamic future. Things are changing in the future, and that's something that we do need to be careful about. The future is ambiguous. We're not entirely sure what's going to happen in the future. And that makes it difficult for us to plan, to prepare, to know how we should be as we move forwards. The future is non-linear. What I mean is that you can't draw a straight line from the past through the present to the future. It's going to change. We cannot predict the future based on the past. Are you trying to work out what these letters are going to stand for? Maybe I don't think you'll get the next one. For me, the future is a mixture of global and local. And we call this glocal. It is a real word, I promise you, but it's talking about acting locally and having a global influence, but also the effect of global factors locally, because the world is more connected. The future is also emergent. It will appear from nowhere. Things happen which we cannot easily predict or foresee, which just emerge from events. And lastly, the future is relational. It's to do with how people interact, with how corporations interact, with how societies and cultures interact, and with how nations interact. And those complexities of our relations introduce all sorts of uncertainties which we need to think about and prepare for. So as we think about these aspects of the future, which are challenging, I would ask you how that makes you feel as we face this future, which is filled with uncertainty for all sorts of reasons. Some people would say that uncertainty is dangerous. It's intimidating. It makes us feel slightly sick in our stomachs. We don't like it. And what we have to do in the face of an uncertain future is to be very, very careful. What we need to do is to protect ourselves. What we need to do is to make sure that nothing ever goes wrong. We want to remove uncertainty as far as possible. But that's not the only way of thinking about the uncertain future. It is possible to embrace uncertainty, to welcome uncertainty as a challenge, to see it as something that we could use and exploit in order to create something new that has never been done before. And if this is true, then we should say that uncertainty is not dangerous but challenging, that the appropriate response is not to be careful but to be brave. Those who dare win. And what we need to do is to see the uncertainty and to exploit it and embrace it and welcome it. So how do you feel about the uncertain future when you think about your personal career, about your family and your children, when you think about your job or your organization, when you think about your nation and our world? Do you feel worried and nervous and intimidated, and we need to be very careful? Or do you feel challenged and engaged and excited, and we need to be brave? These two different reactions are both right. There are things in the future which are dangerous, which we do need to be careful about. But there are also things in the future which are exciting, which we need to be brave about. What does this have to do with risk? Well, let's just think a little bit about the relationship between risk and uncertainty. Everybody uses the word risk, and we all think we know what it means. But everybody has a different view. I'm not sure we really understand the concept very well. So let me give you a very basic introduction into what risk really is. Risk is not the same as uncertainty. Why do I say that? Because all risks are uncertain, but not all uncertainties are risks. So how can we tell the difference? The way to tell the difference between risk and uncertainty is that risk is uncertainty that matters. Because, of course, there are many uncertainties that don't matter. What we need to do is understand the ones that could affect us, that we need to know about and manage and to respond to. And how do we know what matters? The things that matter are our objectives, the things that we set out to do. Those are the things which are at risk, and any uncertainty that could affect our objectives is something we need to know about and manage and prepare to respond to. So if we had a definition of risk, then it needs to connect uncertainty to objectives. There is an ISO standard for risk management. It has the number 31,000. It doesn't really matter. But it connects those two words in a very simple definition that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. But it also says something else very interesting in the ISO standard. It tells us that the effect could be bad or it could be good. But what we're looking for is anything that causes us to deviate from our objectives, from what we expect, from what we plan, from what we need. So that tells us that not all risks are bad. There are some uncertainties that matter because they would hurt us. We could call those threats. But there are also good risks, positive risks, upside risks, risks that if they happened would help us to achieve our goals, to work faster, smarter, cheaper, to deliver more value and more benefits. And risk management is about optimizing the balance between threats and opportunities. Well, that's enough theory. How about applying this to the world of nation building? I think one of the biggest challenges in nation building is dealing with emergent risks, which come at us from nowhere. They have essentially three characteristics. They're unexpected and unpredictable. Where did that come from? They have a very big impact, either good or bad. And after they've happened, everybody says, oh yes, I could have seen that coming, but we didn't. They have a number of different names. There's the name that the general public call them, unknown unknowns. There's the name that risk specialists call them, which is ontological uncertainty. Does anybody else know that word? But they're popularly known as black swans. They're called black swans because everybody knew 300 years ago that all swans are white. until they went to Australia and they found a black bird that looked like a swan. But it can't be a swan because it's not white. And so it has to be something else. The black swan was outside of their conceptual framework. They couldn't even imagine such a thing. And these are the types of risks that we need to think about. These are the ones that will catch us unawares because we can't imagine them, because we can't prepare for them in advance. Or can we? Let me give you some examples. I'm clicking here. Examples that might be good or bad. Things that happened in our world which were completely unforeseen, which had a big impact, and everybody said, we should have seen that coming. The fall of the Berlin Wall, for example. Who saw the end of communism in Europe? Nobody, but it happened, and it was good for many people. The rise of the internet, where did that come from? Was that on anybody's risk register or anybody's plans 20 years ago? And people like Google and Twitter and LinkedIn and those other social networks, which we're all so fond of, and some of you are actually dealing with right now, and you're not listening to me, you're doing your Twitter and your Facebook updates. That's fine. Where did that come from? And hasn't that changed the way we do business and the way we relate together? And then things that are perhaps not so pleasant, like 9/11, September the 11th, 2001 in the States, or the bombings that we had in London in 2005, and other terrorist events around the world, which are completely unexpected, or the global financial crisis of 2008. These are recent examples that we've all seen, which were emergent risks that have affected our personal lives, our organizations, and our nations and our world. So let me bring this home more closely to nation building. I'd like to focus on 3 key questions for us to think about. They all start with the letter O. I'd like us to think about our objectives in nation building. I'd like us to think about the origins of risk to nation building. And finally, ownership of risk in nation building. Who's going to do this? So first of all, objectives. What matters if you want to build Nigeria, if you want to build the United Kingdom, or the DRC, or South Africa, or New Zealand? What matters to us? There are a number of ways we could list the objectives of nation building. Here's some things that all start with the letter P. The first duty of any government is to protect its people and to protect its land. And then we have to provide for people, to make sure that there is enough for people to live and survive and thrive and grow. We have to keep going. We're here for the long term with nation building. And we have to serve the public, not our own interests. If you don't like words that start with P, you might like words that start with S. The same thoughts, the same kind of ideas. What we're after here is to build something which respects the past, recognizes all the good things that are there in our culture and in our traditions, which protects the future so that people protects the present, so that people in our nations are secure and able to go about their business and to live healthy and satisfying lives, and which secures and ensures the future. So those are the objectives which are at risk in our nations. That is the purpose of government and institutions in order to respect the past and to protect the present and to secure the future. Where does risk come from that could affect those things? I've got here the results of some research done by the International Risk Governance Council about 3 years ago in 2010. And they found 12 things which cause risk for nations and for corporations and for individuals, things which cause emergent risk. And I, of course, am not going to talk about all of them. I'm sure you're very happy about that. But there are some things which are obvious, scientific unknowns, technological breakthroughs, or malicious behavior like terrorism and so on. there are also some unexpected things, like conflicting interests. Something which is a threat for one part of our society might be an opportunity for another. And so when one side of our society seeks to exploit and generate uncertainty because it's good for them, it might damage others. Social dynamics, the ways that society works and operates and changes, particularly in our multicultural world with ethnic and religious divisions, very important. And then risk comes from unhelpful motivators. We know this was true in the financial crisis when the bankers in the UK and Europe were driven by personal greed and by personal sense of wanting power. And that happens in other settings elsewhere. These things are important issues for us to grapple with in our personal lives, our ethical and moral approaches to our personal lives and our business, but also in the wider realm of building our nation. So the third O was ownership. It's very important to see that risk management is not just an empty theory. Risk management is a mindset. It's a way of thinking which drives behavior. But somebody has to do it. It's not just theory. So who is going to do this? Who is going to be thinking about and managing these issues that really matter to your nation and to mine? Well, we could say that it's the government's responsibility. It's the responsibility of the executive in order to manage the risks to our nation. That is only part of the truth. It is a part of the truth, but it's not the whole truth. Ownership of risk goes with the scope of our authority. So people who own objectives also own the risks that go with them, which means that in your nation and in mine, it's not all the fault of the government, and it's not all the fault of our politicians or of our institutions. We all have to take responsibility. So that includes our political leaders, but it also includes our business leaders, many of you here today. It includes our educational leaders who are responsible for bringing up that 40% of your country who are under 14 years of age, an incredible statistic. It's the responsibility of society leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, in order to understand the uncertainties that matter in their area of responsibility. And what we need to do is to have people who are prepared to take that responsibility seriously and do something about it. What we need is people who will identify the risks that matter within their own scope of authority and minimize those threats and maximize those opportunities and prepare for the future. We need people who are going to be pioneers in managing risk really on the ground, not as some theoretical thing, not as some job title or responsibility, but as a mindset of the way that they think and act in everything they do. So what we need is people who are going to do this across every aspect of our nation, so that together we are understanding the risks that matter and doing something about it in a coherent and aligned way. What we need to do in our society is to prepare for the risks that we can manage, to be proactive, to do things in advance, to be protective, to make sure that we guard the things that are good, and to be preventative, to stop those bad things coming. And there are a number of very practical things that we can do, each within our own area of responsibility. We can identify the areas of vulnerability in our nation, in our organizations, in our society and our families. We can look out for early warnings of things going wrong. There are plenty of signs that will tell us that we need to be doing something different. We can use risk to make better decisions and be aware of the uncertainties that matter and build that into the way that we think about the future. And we can build flexibility and resilience into our organizations, our society, and our nation. What we want is a risk-aware culture. How are we going to do that? Well, I would submit that the uncertain future is not only dangerous. Uncertainty can be dangerous. If we don't see it coming, it blows up in our faces and something awful happens. And we should be minimizing those sorts of uncertainties. But there are also challenging and exciting uncertainties ahead of us that we can exploit and embrace to make ourselves more innovative and more creative, to give ourselves more competitive advantage, to create more value and benefits for our people and for our stakeholders. The uncertain future is dangerous and challenging, and so is nation building. The good news is that we can do something about it. That risk must be managed. It can be managed, and it must be managed. And one of the good things that we've seen through the first Nigerian Risk Awards is how well some people are engaging with the risks that matter in their own organizations. This can be done. It must be done because nation building matters. What we need is people to step up to the mark, to become pioneers and change agents, to understand and manage risk where they can, where they have influence, where they have authority. And the big question is, who's going to do that? It's very easy for us to say, somebody else's job. This is the job for whoever it is that wins the Risk Manager of the Year, to lead us into managing risk. This is the job for the CRO Forum, for our chief risk officers, or for our risk specialists, or for our consultants, or our academics. Is that really true? We can make a difference. Let me finish with a quote from a really inspirational person, from Gandhi. He said this not about risk management or nation building, but it applies exactly the same. What he said is true. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. Well, I hope you found those few thoughts interesting and challenging, and it is something that we can do something about. It's not just for those who excel in risk management, who we're going to meet in just a few moments. It's for all of us to understand and engage with these things. Thank you very much for your attention.